here he is actually continuing the Soros caravan conspiracy lie. Take a look.
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. No, I wouldn't. I don't know who, but I wouldn't be surprised. A lot of people say yes.
John Podhoretz, your thoughts?
Well, so I was struck by in your interview, Jim, with Trump, that he got very relaxed, and you're saying like this is terrible. You're ramping people up, and he was sort of like, come on, you know, like I wouldn't be here if I didn't do stuff like this. I mean, you understand this is all. It's all part of the game, right? So there is a kind of interesting, I said nihilism before, but it's a kind of like, all right, come on, let's talk turkey here. You know I got to do this. You got to come to me and say, don't do this, and then I got to do it, and then the election will be over and we'll go do something else, something like that. It's as though he was trying to convince you not to take it seriously.
Yeah, you've got to watch his body language. It's almost like he relaxes, and it's almost like you become on par with him, and he just wants to have a conversation that to him is totally on the level. Like of course I have to do this. Like, look what the press is doing to me. Look at how my crowds respond to me. I think at one point he's like, they like me better when I do this. I asked him, I said to the kids, because I've heard the kids and a bunch of his friends have been saying, you've got to knock it off. You've got to cut the rhetoric. And he's like, no, I don't really hear it at all. And in fact, like, I'm winning. It's working for me. I got here this way. And that's how he feels. And it's just different. Like, I know that almost every day now it's a rant from somebody against Trump. But what we are talking about, what Mika was talking about earlier. So when you talk about sending 15,000 troops to the border, which you're right, probably won't happen. When you run that ad, which I'm sure you guys are going to show later, where it's sort of clearly a scary, all these drugs are coming in, all these thugs are coming in. Yes, some are coming in. And yes, a caravan is coming. But it's totally disproportionate to the response and the amount of attention that it gets. And this is different in politics. The only remote parallel that I can think of, Barnicle was talking about in his lifetime, and mine would have been, there's definitely when Bush was president, there was always concerns that he was politicizing terrorism. Well, at least the threat of terrorism was real. We really had intelligence reports saying that there were potentially imminent threats in different areas at different times. This really isn't that real. Even if he's saying he's a better crowd size estimator than the rest of us, we've all seen the photos, so maybe it's 4,000 instead of 2,000. But it's men, women, and children weeks away on a border that's fortified already by 2 layers, and you're going to send 15,000 in, which Willie mentioned is what you have in Afghanistan, where we're fighting terrorists and thugs in one of the most dangerous places in the history of humanity.
So we're talking, Susan, about tactics here, how the president is handling this going into the election. He's talking about the caravan. He's talking about sending troops. He's talking about ending birthright citizenship. He floated the idea of a tax cut that evaporated suddenly. The question is, will it have some impact come Tuesday? We see the rallies, we see the energy, we see them chanting, lock him up, talking about Mayor Andrew Gillum, who's running in the state of Florida to become the governor there. Will they work with Republican voters, or just with that segment of Republican voters that was already going to be at the rally cheering, lock him up?
Well, it depends which Republican voters you're talking about. If you're talking about Republican voters who are going to the polls in swing congressional districts, it's going to turn them off. They'll either, Republicans or moderates will stay home, or they will vote against the Republicans, because this is exactly the type of thing that turns them off. All of this bravado, it brings out the worst in Trump to those types of voters. If you're talking about a Senate race in a deep red state, that like Claire McCaskill or some others, that's in Nevada, for example, where it's purple, Trump's staying away. So in a red state, that's going to work with Republicans to really gin up their turnout, and that's where the play is. But one thing I just want to highlight that Jim said that I find so surprising is he said that when the president replied, well, I have to fight back. It's my only way. It's like in the campaign. You're the president of the United States. You have a lot of things at your fingertips. You don't have to rely on news networks to get your intel. You can actually go to the folks who have it, who can give you real numbers on the caravan. But he doesn't want to do that. He just wants to play into that certain media base.
So, on the eve of an election, our democracy is under attack with bombs targeting Trump's enemies and shootings in synagogues by nationalists imitating the president's racist rants on refugees. Here's where we really are. Any other president, politician, or just decent human being would be horrified that this is how the 2018 elections are concluding. But not President Donald Trump. In fact, he's made clear that he will exploit any opportunity, including tragedy and bloodshed, to seize what he believes to be an advantage. Bombs sent to some of our most important national leaders, who all happen to be his critics. The most horrific anti-Semitic act of murder in our history. The president saw both events as purely political problems, threatening Republican control of Congress because they slowed down his party's political momentum. He even whined that he wasn't shown proper respect by the press at the Pittsburgh memorial service. Some didn't even want him there, our president. They didn't even want the president there. After failing the test of basic leadership in those two horrible crimes, which happened in the past 2 weeks, he's now talking again like an autocrat in training, threatening to rewrite the Constitution with his own pen, using the great U.S. military like a king's army, claiming he'll send more troops to the U.S.-Mexican border to stop a phantom invasion of imaginary marauders, brown people, terrorists. That the number of fighters, this is the number of fighters we have in Afghanistan he wants to send there.
Can I just point
Those
out,
new polls from National Public Radio, hold on, John,
Sorry.
show American the truth. The rhetoric of this racist, heartless, soulless man will lead to more violence. Yes, I said that, and a lot of Americans believe it too. They see what is happening to our country. This is a so-called leader with no shame. He doesn't care. He's got no sense of decency, no sense of duty, and no limits, and this is important for everyone to understand, no limits of what he's capable of doing to stave off any humiliation for himself. The humiliation that his desperate actions suggest is that he knows what's coming next Tuesday. It could be bad for him. There could be subpoena power. There could be impeachment. He knows he's on the line, and he will do anything to save himself. The question is, what are we going to do? What are Democrats and Republicans going to do? Because if they want to check on this man, if you want a slight check on this man and his unrelenting race to the finish here to make sure he can continue destroying this country, you might want to vote all D, even if it's not your party this time around. It might be worth it. John Podhoretz?
So we're saying that, Trump is doing what he can to gin up his base and, go back to his core issues, right? If you look at the polls, there are dozens of districts that we're going to decide control of the House that are 1, 2, 3-point races. And most of them are not in core deep red places, but are in the suburbs and purple places. What is the political wisdom here? Is the political wisdom to start ranting about, the evil of immigrants? Or would it be to be a uniter after Pittsburgh? I would look at it this way. This is a horrible analogy, but governors all over the country have strengthened themselves in the face of natural disasters by handling the natural disaster well. Now, Pittsburgh is not a natural disaster. It's a horrible mass shooting. But the president's calm, steady hand, a good speech, comforting the nation, all of that, in those districts that Republicans have to win in order to secure or maintain the control of the Congress. That's the smarter play, it seems to me. He's got a 1-point spread in all these places. He wants to make what?
He isn't capable of
I'm
doing
not saying
that.
but I'm saying this is political malpractice on his part. He is shooting himself in the foot, possibly, because he needs to get those
But they
people.
already wrote those districts off, John. Those districts are gone. They have been written off by this administration. They say, we're not going to be able to help, so let's shore up where we can and make sure the Senate maybe picks up a seat.
Well, the polling doesn't show that they're going to
just
lose necessarily. I mean, that's the point.
I would just argue that at this point, look at him and look at what he's doing right now and vote on that. Still ahead on Morning Joe, Steve Kornacki is here with a ton of new polls, plus the ad that encapsulates everything we just said. The president ramps up the fear and loathing 5 days before the midterms. We'll show you his troubling new message. You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.